1. The Demon of the Abandoned Farmhouse. Eliza had always heard stories about the old farmhouse on the outskirts of her small town. The building had stood abandoned for over 50 years, its wooden beams slowly rotting and its windows smashed. Locals said it was haunted, but not by the usual kind of ghost. People whispered about a demon that roamed the property, feeding off anyone who dared enter. One summer night, Eliza and her friends decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights and a video camera, they approached the crumbling structure. The air around them grew cold, unnaturally cold, for a warm July night. As they crossed the threshold into the house, the temperature dropped even more, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over them. Suddenly, the flashlight beams began to flicker, casting strange shadows on the walls. From the darkness, a low growl echoed through the house, sending chills down Eliza's spine. Her friends froze, their eyes wide with terror. Then, out of nowhere, the door slammed shut with such force that the entire house seemed to shake. Panic set in. They tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Eliza could hear heavy breathing behind her, but when she turned, no one was there. One by one, her friends started to scream, clutching their heads in agony. Their eyes rolled back, and their bodies contorted unnaturally. Eliza could feel the presence of something evil, something that wasn't human. In the darkness, she saw it, a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes, looming over her. It moved with unnatural speed, darting toward her. She screamed, and just as its claws reached out to grasp her, she blacked out. When Eliza awoke, she was alone in the house. Her friends were gone. To this day, no one knows what happened to them, but the town speaks in hushed tones about the demon that roams the abandoned farmhouse, always hungry for new victims. 2. The Highway Demon. Tom had been a trucker for over 20 years and had driven through every kind of weather and terrain imaginable. But nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered one stormy night on a desolate stretch of highway in New Mexico. It was around 2 a.m., and the road ahead was pitch black, save for the faint glow of his truck's headlights. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of him. Out of the corner of his eye, Tom noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, drenched from the storm. But as he drew closer, he realized something was terribly wrong. The figure was unnaturally tall, its limbs too long, and its skin a sickly gray. Its face was featureless, except for a wide, toothy grin that seemed to stretch impossibly far. Tom felt a wave of dread wash over him, but before he could react, the creature stepped into the middle of the road. Tom slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. He felt the sickening thud of impact, followed by the screeching sound of metal against metal. His truck swerved, sliding off the road and into a ditch. When the truck finally came to a stop, Tom sat in stunned silence, trying to catch his breath. Then he heard it, a soft tapping on the window. Slowly, he turned his head. The creature was there, grinning at him through the glass. Its eyes, hollow and black, stared directly into his soul. Tom tried to scream, but no sound came out. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it was a deafening pounding. Desperate, Tom threw the truck into reverse, slamming on the gas and pulling back onto the road. As he sped away, the creature faded into the distance, but its grin remained burned into his mind. To this day, Tom refuses to drive that stretch of highway, convinced that the demon is still out there, waiting for its next victim. 3. The Haunting of Black Hollow Woods. Jess had always been an avid hiker, and when she moved to a new town, she was eager to explore the nearby trails. Black Hollow Woods was known for its scenic beauty, but it also had a darker reputation. Locals spoke of a roaming demon that lurked in the forest, preying on those who ventured too far off the beaten path. Undeterred by the stories, Jess set out on a solo hike one crisp autumn morning. The woods were eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. After a few hours, she noticed the forest growing darker, the trees seeming to close in around her. The air grew thick, and a sense of unease settled in her chest. As she continued deeper into the woods, Jess began to feel like she was being watched. She turned around several times, but saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of something moving through the trees, something tall and gaunt, with glowing eyes. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace, trying to shake the feeling of being followed. but no matter how fast she walked, the presence seemed to grow closer. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the woods, freezing Jess in her tracks. It sounded human, but there was something off about it, something inhuman. Without thinking, Jess broke into a run, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear heavy footsteps behind her, getting closer and closer. Just as she reached the edge of the woods, she felt something brush against her back, cold and claw-like. She stumbled out of the forest, collapsing on the ground. When she looked back, the demon was standing at the tree line, watching her with its glowing eyes. It didn't follow her out of the woods, but Jess knew it was still there, waiting for the next unlucky soul to wander into its domain. 4. The possession of 13 Willow Street. In 1987, the Johnson family moved into their dream home on 13 Willow Street. It was a charming old Victorian house with plenty of space for their growing family. But it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. Doors would slam shut on their own, and objects would move across the room with no explanation. At first, they thought it was just the house settling or drafts. But when their daughter, Emily, began waking up with scratches and bruises on her body, they realized something far more sinister was at play. A local priest was called to bless the house, but as soon as he stepped inside, he recoiled in horror. He could feel the presence of a demon, not tied to the house, but roaming freely through it, drawn to the family like a predator to its prey. The priest performed an exorcism, but the demon was too powerful. It possessed Emily, twisting her body and voice in horrifying ways. The family watched in terror as their sweet daughter became something unrecognizable. She would speak in tongues, scream obscenities, and contort her body into impossible positions. The demon had taken control. Desperate, the Johnsons sought help from a renowned demonologist who confirmed their worst fears. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a roaming demon that had attached itself to Emily. It had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, until it found a vulnerable host. After weeks of battling the demon, the demonologist managed to banish it, but the damage was done. Emily was never the same. The family moved away, but they always feared that the demon might return, still searching for its next victim. 5. The demonic hitchhiker. Late one night, Sarah was driving home from a party when she noticed a young woman standing on the side of the road, her thumb outstretched, asking for a ride. The woman looked distressed, and against her better judgment, Sarah pulled over to help. The woman got into the car without saying a word. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were wide and unblinking. As they drove, Sarah tried to make conversation, but the hitchhiker remained silent, staring straight ahead. A sense of unease crept over Sarah, but she brushed it off, thinking the woman was just shaken up. As they neared the town, Sarah glanced over at the hitchhiker again, only to find that she had vanished. The passenger seat was empty. Panicked, Sarah swerved to the side of the road, her heart racing. Before she could process what had happened, a voice whispered in her ear, low and guttural, "You shouldn't have picked me up." In the rearview mirror, she saw the woman sitting in the backseat, her eyes now glowing red. The car's engine died, and the air grew cold. The last thing Sarah remembered was the sound of her own screams before everything went black. When she awoke, she was alone in her car, parked on the side of the road. But the terror of that night stayed with her, and she never picked up another hitchhiker again. 6. The demon in the mirror. Emily had always been fascinated by old things, especially antiques. One weekend, while browsing through a flea market, she came across an ornate, vintage mirror. Its frame was blackened with age, and intricate carvings lined the edges. The seller warned her, in a cryptic tone, that the mirror had a dark history, but Emily shrugged it off. She thought it was just a way to inflate the price, so she bought it anyway, thinking it would look perfect in her bedroom. From the moment she brought the mirror home, strange things began happening. At first, it was subtle. Objects would be slightly out of place, or she'd catch glimpses of movement in the mirror that didn't match what was in the room. But soon, the disturbances became impossible to ignore. Late at night, Emily would wake up to the sound of whispering. She would turn to the mirror and see her reflection, but distorted. Her reflection's face was twisted in a sinister grin, even though she wasn't smiling. She would blink, and the image would return to normal. Convinced she was just overturned, Emily tried to ignore it. One night, as she was brushing her hair before bed, the room grew unnaturally cold. Emily glanced into the mirror and her heart froze. Standing behind her in the reflection was a tall, dark figure. It had no discernible features, but its eyes, glowing red, stared into hers with malevolent intensity. She spun around, but no one was there. Her reflection, however, remained as it was, frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouth agape. The figure in the mirror stepped closer to her reflection, its clawed hand reaching out, as if trying to break through the glass. Panicked, Emily ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Over the following days, the presence grew stronger. Every time she looked into the mirror, the figure was there, watching her, waiting for the moment she would let her guard down. Her reflection would move independently, mocking her, making it clear that she wasn't in control anymore. She tried to get rid of the mirror, but every time she threw it out or smashed it, it would reappear the next day, sitting ominously in her bedroom. It was as if the demon inside had latched onto her, refusing to let go. The mirror wasn't just an antique, it was a gateway, and the demon was now roaming free, slowly but surely crossing over into her world. To this day, Emily refuses to sleep in a room with mirrors, haunted by the knowledge that the demon could still be out there, watching from the other side, waiting for the right moment to return. 7. The Demon of the Dark Woods Cabin. Daniel and his friends were looking for a secluded spot for a weekend getaway. They found it in an old cabin deep in the woods, miles away from civilization. The cabin was rustic and worn, but it had just enough charm to pass for a cozy retreat. The owner had warned them not to stray too far into the forest at night, but they laughed it off as local superstition. On the first night, after a long day of hiking, they sat around the campfire, telling ghost stories and roasting marshmallows. The stars twinkled overhead, and the sound of the crackling fire lulled them into a false sense of security. As the night grew darker, Daniel noticed something strange, a pair of glowing eyes in the distance, just beyond the tree line. They were watching, unmoving. He tried to shake off the unease, but the feeling of being watched persisted. After everyone had gone to bed, Daniel stayed up, staring into the dark woods where the eyes had been. He told himself it was just a trick of the light, but the air felt different, thicker, oppressive. That night, he awoke to the sound of scratching at the cabin door. At first, he thought it was a wild animal, but the scratches were deliberate, too rhythmic to be random. Slowly, the door creaked open, and the temperature in the room plummeted. A dark shadow slipped inside, moving unnaturally, its form twisting and contorting in the dim moonlight. The creature that entered the room was tall and gaunt, with long, bony limbs and a face that seemed to shift and change, never staying the same for more than a few seconds. Its eyes, however, were constant, glowing red, burning with malevolent intent. Daniel tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. The demon crept closer, its breath ragged and foul, as it whispered unintelligible words. Daniel froze in terror as it reached out a hand, cold and skeletal, brushing against his skin. The creature's touch was like ice, burning and numbing at the same time. Just as it was about to fully grasp him, the door slammed shut, and the creature vanished. Over the next 2 days, the sightings became more frequent. His friends began seeing it too, dark figures lurking just outside the windows, watching them from the shadows of the trees. At night, they heard footsteps circling the cabin, but every time they looked, nothing was there. They cut their trip short, leaving the cabin behind, but Daniel never forgot the demon that had stalked them. Years later, he discovered that the cabin had once been the site of dark rituals, sacrifices to summon a roaming demon, one that still wandered the woods, searching for new victims. 8. The Demon of the Empty Playground. It was a quiet evening when Alex decided to take a shortcut through the old playground on his way home. The swings creaked in the wind, and the merry-go-round slowly spun, even though no one was around. There was something eerie about the place, especially after dark. The playground had been abandoned for years, ever since the tragic deaths of 2 children who had gone missing and were later found under mysterious circumstances. As Alex walked through, he felt a strange pull toward the rusted slide, as if something was urging him to come closer. He resisted at first, but curiosity got the better of him. As he approached, he noticed the air growing colder, and a heavy silence fell over the playground. The normal sounds of the night, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, were gone. Suddenly, he heard the faint sound of children laughing, though no one was there. The swings began to move on their own, gently at first, then violently, as if unseen hands were pushing them. Panic gripped Alex, but his feet wouldn't move. The laughter grew louder, more sinister, echoing all around him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a figure standing by the jungle gym. It was a small child, at least that's what it appeared to be at first. But as Alex looked closer, the figure's face twisted into something grotesque. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The figure moved toward him, its form flickering in and out of sight, like a broken projection. Alex turned to run, but the ground beneath him felt like it was pulling him back. He could feel the presence behind him, growing stronger, darker, as if the demon was feeding off his fear. He barely made it out of the playground before collapsing on the street, gasping for breath. When he looked back, the demon was gone, but the swings were still moving, and the sound of laughter echoed faintly in the distance. 9. The demon in the attic. After the passing of his grandmother, Jason inherited her old house, a large, creaky place that had stood for over a century. He remembered spending summers there as a child, but there was one room he had never dared to enter, the attic. His grandmother had always warned him never to go up there, claiming it was haunted by something far worse than a ghost. Now that the house was his, Jason couldn't resist his curiosity. One evening, he climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, pushing open the heavy wooden door. The room was dark and filled with dust, the air thick and musty. Old furniture and forgotten relics were scattered about, but something else caught his attention, a large, ornate chest in the corner of the room. The moment Jason touched the chest, the temperature dropped. The once still air stirred, as though something had been awakened. The lights flickered, and a deep, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Suddenly, the chest began to shake violently, as if something inside was trying to break free. Jason stepped back, but the attic door slammed shut, trapping him inside. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was massive, its skin blackened and cracked, like it had been burned. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth stretched into a terrifying grin. The demon towered over Jason, its presence suffocating. It spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, promising pain and suffering if he didn't leave the house. Jason's grandmother had trapped the demon long ago, and now, with the chest disturbed, it was free once more. Jason fled the attic, leaving the house behind for good. But the demon didn't stay confined. Rumors spread that it had begun roaming, looking for anyone foolish enough to cross its path, feeding on fear and despair. 10. The Curse of the Crossroads Demon. Jake had always been a skeptic, laughing off the old legends about demons who appeared at crossroads to make dark deals. That was until one night when he found himself stranded on a lonely road, his car engine dead, with no cell service in sight. As he waited for help, the wind howled, and the moon cast an eerie glow over the empty intersection. Out of nowhere, a man appeared, dressed in a black suit, his face pale and expressionless. He offered Jake a deal, a way to fix his car and grant him wealth, fame, whatever he desired. But Jake had heard enough of these stories to know that deals with demons never ended well. When he refused, the man's face twisted into something horrific, his eyes glowing red, his smile revealing sharp teeth. The demon began to circle him, whispering promises of power and fortune, but Jake stood his ground. Enraged, the demon vanished, but Jake soon realized that it hadn't left him alone. Everywhere he went, strange things started happening, shadows moving, voices whispering his name, objects disappearing and reappearing in strange places. The demon was following him, roaming just out of sight, waiting for him to break, to give in to the temptation of its offer. Now, Jake lives in constant fear, knowing that the crossroads demon is always near watching, waiting for the moment he'll finally succumb. 11. The Demon of the Silent Hotel. The Street James Hotel, nestled in a remote mountain town, had long been abandoned. For years, it stood as a crumbling relic of its former grandeur. Locals avoided it, whispering tales of eerie sounds and strange shadows seen from the windows. But when Melissa and her friends stumbled upon it during a hiking trip, they decided to spend a night there. It was a decision they would regret for the rest of their lives. The hotel lobby was covered in dust, but surprisingly intact. Faded furniture sat eerily in place, as if waiting for guests who never arrived. Melissa felt uneasy, but her friends convinced her it was just the vibe of an old building. They chose rooms at random, agreeing to meet up later for a ghost hunt. By midnight, they gathered in the ballroom, which was covered in grime and moonlit shadows. Their voices echoed eerily off the walls as they dared one another to explore the darker corners of the hotel. As they ventured down the dimly lit hallways, Melissa noticed the temperature drop sharply. She rubbed her arms, feeling a chill that went deep into her bones. Suddenly, they heard a soft melody drifting through the hotel. It was the haunting sound of a piano, playing a slow waltz from somewhere on the upper floor. But no one was there. Curious, Melissa followed the sound, her friends trailing behind her nervously. The music led them to a grand staircase, but the moment they set foot on it, the hotel seemed to come alive. The chandeliers flickered, and the walls creaked as if something ancient had been stirred awake. Melissa's heart pounded as she felt a presence behind her. She turned and saw him. At the top of the stairs stood a figure dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned suit. His eyes were hollow, his face a mask of malevolent calm. He motioned for them to come closer, but his smile twisted unnaturally wide. This was no man. Melissa knew instantly that this was the demon the locals had warned about, the one that roamed the halls of the silent hotel, feeding on those foolish enough to enter. The figure vanished as suddenly as he appeared, but the terror he brought with him didn't fade. Doors began to slam shut on their own, trapping Melissa and her friends inside. They ran in all directions, desperately trying to escape, but the hallways seemed to shift, leading them in circles. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them, coming closer with every second. One by one, her friends disappeared into the darkness, their screams cut short. Melissa was the only one left. She could feel the demon's cold breath on the back of her neck. There was no escape. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was a pair of glowing red eyes and that terrible smile. When search parties arrived at the St. James Hotel, they'd found no trace of Melissa or her friends. The building stood eerily silent, as if nothing had happened. But locals claim that on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of the piano playing, calling out to new victims. 12. The Forest Demon of Crooked Hollow. Crooked Hollow was known for its dense, twisted forest, a place where the trees seemed to grow in unnatural shapes, and the deeper you ventured, the harder it became to find your way back. It was rumored that a demon lurked there, a dark spirit that roamed the forest, cursing anyone who entered its domain. Few people believed the stories, but for Maya and her brother Nick, the legend became all too real. The two had grown up in the nearby town and had always heard the tales of the demon, but they had never dared to enter the heart of the forest. One autumn afternoon, they decided to test their courage and hike deep into Crooked Hollow, convinced that the stories were nothing more than myths. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the forest became. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and gnarled, forming strange, claw-like shapes. The air was thick and still, and no birds sang. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. As dusk approached, they realized they were lost. The trail had vanished, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Panic set in when they noticed something else. Shadows moving just beyond the tree line, darting between the trunks. At first, they thought it was animals, but as the shadows drew closer, it became clear that they were far too large and far too fast. Suddenly, the forest was filled with whispers. Faint, eerie voices that seemed to come from all directions. Maya grabbed Nick's arm, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. They were being hunted. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, lanky, and shrouded in darkness. Its limbs were unnaturally long, and its face was obscured by a hood. But its eyes were glowing red, burning with a malevolent hunger. This was the demon of Crooked Hollow, the entity that had claimed the forest as its own. The demon moved with terrifying speed, circling them as the whispers became deafening. Nick tried to run, but the demon was faster, appearing in front of him in an instant. With a single swipe of its clawed hand, Nick was thrown to the ground, unconscious. Maya screamed, backing away, but the demon was relentless. It didn't speak, but its presence filled her with a cold, primal terror. She could feel its intent. It wasn't just going to kill her. It was going to consume her, body and soul. Summoning every ounce of courage, Maya grabbed a sharp branch from the ground and swung it wildly at the demon. It screeched in fury, recoiling for just a moment, enough for Maya to grab Nick and drag him through the trees. They ran blindly through the forest, the demon's whispers still chasing them. Hours later, they stumbled out of Crooked Hollow, exhausted and terrified. They never spoke of what happened that night, but they knew the truth. The demon of Crooked Hollow was real, and it was still out there, roaming the forest, waiting for the next fool who dared to enter its twisted domain. 13. The shadow demon of the old church. In a quiet, forgotten village in Eastern Europe, there was an old, crumbling church that the locals refused to enter. The building had been abandoned for decades, its windows shattered, and its once majestic steeple leaning precariously to one side. But it wasn't the disrepair that kept people away. It was the stories of the shadow demon that roamed within. Thomas had always been skeptical of the legends. He was an outsider, a photographer traveling through the region, and when he heard about the abandoned church, he saw it as the perfect subject for his next shoot. Despite the warnings from the villagers, Thomas ventured inside one overcast afternoon, his camera in hand. The interior of the church was dark and oppressive. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay lingered in every corner. As Thomas began taking photos, he noticed strange things in the images, dark shapes that weren't there in real life, shadowy figures that seemed to loom in the background. He brushed it off as tricks of the light or faults in the old camera, but as he continued exploring, the temperature in the church dropped sharply. A feeling of dread settled over him, heavy and suffocating. He tried to leave, but the heavy wooden doors slammed shut, trapping him inside. From the darkness, a shadow detached itself from the walls, moving slowly toward him. It had no distinct form, shifting and flickering as if made of smoke, but its eyes, cold, glowing, and full of malice, were fixed on Thomas. It was the shadow demon, the entity that the villagers feared. The demon didn't speak, but its presence filled Thomas with overwhelming terror. He could feel it pulling at his very soul, draining his energy with every passing second. The shadows around him seemed to grow longer, reaching for him, wrapping around his legs and arms, binding him in place. Desperate, Thomas fumbled with his camera, hoping to capture the demon in one last photo, as if that could somehow stop it. But as the flash went off, the demon recoiled, hissing in rage. The light seemed to weaken it, just enough for Thomas to break free and sprint toward the doors. With a final push, he forced them open and stumbled out into the daylight. Gasping for breath, he looked back at the church. The shadows inside still flickered and moved, but the demon had retreated for now. Thomas left the village that same day, but he could never shake the feeling that the shadow demon had followed him. Sometimes, late at night, he would catch a glimpse of something dark and shifting in the corners of his vision. A reminder that the demon wasn't bound to the church, it was roaming, always watching. 14. The possession of the singing doll. As a child, Amara had loved dolls. She had a collection of them, all neatly displayed on a shelf in her room. But there was one doll, in particular, that she was most proud of, a porcelain doll with long, dark curls and a delicate lace dress. What made the doll special was its ability to sing. With a simple wind-up key on its back, it would sing a soft, haunting lullaby that echoed through the room. One day, while cleaning out the attic of her grandmother's house, Amara found the doll again. It had been years since she last played with it, and though it was dusty and worn, it still looked as beautiful as ever. Nostalgic, she wound up the key and listened to the familiar melody. That night, strange things began to happen. Amara awoke to the sound of the doll singing, even though she hadn't wound it up. The melody was slower this time, more ominous. She tried to ignore it, but as the nights passed, the doll's singing grew more frequent, and she started hearing whispers, low, guttural voices that seemed to come from the doll itself. Then, Amara began to notice scratches on her arms and legs, as if tiny claws had raked across her skin while she slept. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her around the room, and its once sweet expression now looked twisted and malevolent. One night, Amara woke to find the doll sitting at the foot of her bed, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, staring at her with a cold, lifeless gaze. As she watched in horror, the doll began to sing again, but this time the words were clear. It was no longer a lullaby, it was a chant, a dark incantation that filled the room with a sense of dread. Amara tried to get rid of the doll, throwing it into the trash, but the next morning it was back on her shelf as if it had never left. Desperate, she sought out a local priest who confirmed her worst fears. The doll had been possessed by a roaming demon, one that used the innocent toy as a vessel to torment its victims. The priest performed an exorcism, and though the doll was silent after that, Amara could never bring herself to look at it again. She buried it deep in her grandmother's attic, hoping that would be enough to contain the demon. But even now, years later, she sometimes wakes up dead of night. 15. The demon behind the door. Ethan moved into his new apartment on the outskirts of town, excited to have a place of his own. It was a small, quiet complex, perfect for someone looking for peace and solitude. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, but Ethan didn't think much of it. He settled in, enjoying the calm of his new home. But soon he began to notice something strange about one of the doors in the apartment, the closet door in his bedroom. Every time he closed it, it would creak open just a crack, no matter how hard he pulled it shut. At first, he dismissed it as an old hinge or a draft, but then the noises started. In the middle of the night, Ethan would hear faint knocking coming from inside the closet. It was soft at first, barely audible, but as the nights passed, it grew louder, more insistent. He would lie in bed, staring at the door, watching as it slowly creaked open on its own. One night, he mustered the courage to get out of bed and open the door fully. The closet was empty, just as it always had been, but the air inside was ice cold. As he stood there, staring into the darkness, he heard a voice, a low, gravelly whisper, "Let me out." Terrified, Ethan slammed the door shut and moved his dresser in front of it, hoping that would stop whatever was inside. But the knocking continued, growing louder and more desperate. The whispering became more frequent, and sometimes, in the dead of night, Ethan would hear scratching, like claws dragging against the wood. He called a paranormal expert who confirmed what Ethan had feared. The closet was a gateway, and a demon was trapped inside, trying to break free. The expert warned him that the demon was growing stronger, feeding off Ethan's fear, and that soon it would be able to cross over. Ethan fled the apartment, leaving everything behind. The building stands empty now, but neighbors still report strange sounds coming from his old unit, knocking, whispering, and the slow creak of a closet door opening on its own. 16. The demon beneath the lake. Logan and his friends had always been drawn to the eerie beauty of Rafe Lake, an isolated body of water surrounded by dense woods. It was said that no fish swam in its depths and that boats mysteriously disappeared. Legend had it that something ancient, something evil, lurked beneath the still waters, waiting for the careless and unwary to trespass. One hot summer afternoon, Logan and his group decided to test the myth by camping at the edge of the lake. Armed with kayaks and gear, they paddled out to the center of the lake, eager to prove the locals wrong. The water was unnaturally cold for a summer day, and an uneasy silence hung in the air. Not even the sound of birds could be heard. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a thick fog rolled over the lake, turning everything into a shadowy haze. Logan noticed strange ripples in the water, even though the lake was perfectly calm. They seemed to move toward the center, as if drawn by some unseen force. That night, while the group sat around the campfire, the fog thickened into an almost impenetrable wall. The lake was barely visible now, and an unsettling chill settled over the campsite. Suddenly, the ground beneath them vibrated, followed by a low, rumbling noise that seemed to rise up from the lake itself. Logan peered into the fog, his flashlight cutting through the thick mist. That's when he saw it, a dark shape rising from the center of the lake. It was massive, humanoid in form, but its body seemed to be made of water and shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly green light, and its long, clawed arms reached out toward the shore. The others saw it too. They screamed and scrambled to their feet, but the creature was fast, much faster than they could have imagined. A black, clawed hand shot out from the water and dragged one of their kayaks beneath the surface in an instant. Logan could barely breathe, his chest tight with terror. He and his friends backed away, but the demon was already emerging from the water, towering over them. The stench of decay and brine filled the air as it approached, its glowing eyes locking onto Logan. Desperate, they retreated into the woods, but the demon didn't need to chase them. The air grew heavier with each passing second, and the sound of rushing water filled their ears, even though they were far from the shore. Logan glanced back, only to see that the demon had vanished, but the lake's surface was now boiling, churning as if the waters themselves were alive. They didn't wait to find out what would happen next. They abandoned their camp, fleeing through the woods, leaving behind their tents and gear. But as they ran, they heard the same low rumble that had first emerged from Lake, growing louder with every step they took. Logan has never returned to Wraith Lake, but others who have camped there since have reported seeing strange lights in water and hearing deep, guttural growling from the lake's depths. 17. The demon in the radio. Back in the 1980s, old radios were still a common feature in many households, their static-filled broadcasts crackling across the airwaves. Mark, a radio enthusiast, loved collecting these vintage pieces. He had an entire room dedicated to his collection, and one night he brought home a particularly unique find. A World War II-era radio, still in working condition. The seller had been eager to part with it, almost too eager, but Mark didn't think much of it at the time. Excited to test it out, he plugged it in and adjusted the dial. At first, all he heard was static. He turned the knob slowly, searching for a signal, when suddenly, a voice cut through the noise. The voice was low, almost a whisper, and the language was something Mark didn't recognize. Curious, he continued listening, but the voice grew more distorted, echoing as if coming from a great distance. Then, without warning, the room went cold. Mark shivered, but his focus remained on the radio. The voice on the other end shifted, growing louder and clearer. This time, it wasn't just unintelligible gibberish. It was speaking to him directly, calling his name. Mark's hands froze on the dial. He hadn't told anyone about the radio. How could this voice know his name? As he leaned in closer to the speaker, the voice began laughing, a deep, guttural laugh that filled the room with a sense of dread. Suddenly, the radio flickered off, and the room plunged into darkness. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled for the light switch. When the lights came back on, the radio was back on too, but the static was gone. Instead, there was a continuous hum, like the sound of a distant engine. Mark tried to turn the radio off, but the dial wouldn't move. In the background, beneath the hum, he could hear faint whispers, his name again, repeated over and over, growing louder until it felt like they were shouting inside his head. In a panic, Mark unplugged the radio, but the voices continued. The lights in the room flickered, and a shadow moved across the wall, too tall and too thin to be human. It lingered near the radio, its glowing red eyes fixed on Mark. The demon had used the radio as a gateway, crossing into his home. Even after destroying the radio, Mark wasn't free. The entity had found him, and it wasn't going to leave. From that night on, Mark heard the whispers everywhere, on his phone, in his dreams, even in the wind. The radio had been the demon's way in, but now that it was here, it no longer needed a medium to torment him. 18. The demon in the catacombs. Catherine had always been fascinated by history, particularly the dark and mysterious parts that others preferred to forget. When she had the opportunity to visit the ancient catacombs beneath Paris, she jumped at the chance. The twisting tunnels, lined with the bones of long-dead souls, had always called to her. But what she didn't realize was that the dead weren't the only ones lurking down there. Her tour group was small, and the guide led them through the narrow passageways with practiced ease, pointing out various historical sites along the way. But as they ventured deeper into the catacombs, Catherine felt a growing sense of unease. The air became colder, the walls seemed to close in, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. At one point, she stopped to take a photo, falling slightly behind the group. The flicker of her camera's flash illuminated something unusual, an alcove that wasn't part of the official tour. Drawn to it, she stepped away from the group, ignoring the guide's warnings to stay close. As she approached the alcove, the temperature dropped even further. Inside was an ancient stone door, partially hidden by piles of bones. Etched into the stone were strange symbols Catherine couldn't recognize. The air around her seemed to thrum with an unnatural energy, and a low guttural growl echoed from behind the door. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and a foul stench filled the air, like rotting meat and sulfur. From the cracks in the door, a black, mist-like form began to seep out, coiling and twisting as it filled the alcove. The shadows grew darker, and a pair of red eyes appeared in the mist, staring at her with malevolent intent. The demon was free. Catherine stumbled back, but the shadowy figure lunged toward her. She barely escaped, running back to her tour group, her heart pounding in her chest. But even as she left the catacombs, she knew that the demon was not bound by the stone walls. It had followed her. From that day on, Catherine was haunted by dark visions, shadowy figures watching her, growls echoing in the dead of night, and whispers calling her back to the catacombs. The demon had latched onto her, roaming freely now that it had found a new host. 19. The demon in the old theater. The Lyric Theater had been closed for over 50 years, its doors locked and its once grand stage left to rot. But the old theater held a dark secret, one that kept people away. It was said that a demon roamed the empty rows, a malevolent spirit that had claimed the theater after a tragic fire killed dozens of performers during a final show. When Kyle, an amateur filmmaker, decided to shoot a documentary about haunted places, he knew the theater would be perfect. Despite the warnings from the locals, he and his small crew broke in one night to capture footage of the dilapidated stage. The theater was covered in dust and decay, the seats torn and the curtains blackened with age. As they set up their cameras, strange things began to happen. Footsteps echoed through the empty rows, and the faint sound of applause reverberated from the walls, though no one was there. Kyle brushed it off as ambient noise, but his cameramen seemed uneasy. He swore he saw a figure standing in the shadows watching them. Then, as Kyle filmed a shot of the stage, the temperature dropped drastically. His breath fogged in front of him, and the lights on their cameras flickered. That's when they heard it, a low, menacing growl coming from behind the curtains. The crew froze, staring at the stage as the curtains began to move, slowly parting on their own. From the darkness beyond, a figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, its skin charred and blackened, as if burned in a fire. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth twisted into a wide, cruel grin. The demon. Before Kyle could react, the demon was upon them. It moved with unnatural speed, its claws slashing through the air as the crew scattered in terror. One by one, the lights went out, plunging the theater into darkness. Kyle could hear his crew's screams, but he couldn't see them. In the dim light of his camera's screen, he saw the demon again, standing in the middle of the stage, staring straight at him. Its voice echoed in his mind, whispering promises of torment and destruction. The air grew thick with smoke, and Kyle realized that the fire that had once consumed the theater had never truly gone out. It had been kept alive by the demon, waiting for new souls to claim. Kyle ran, abandoning his equipment and fleeing the theater. But even after he escaped, the demon's voice followed him, haunting him in his dreams and filling his waking moments with dread. 20. The demon's mark. For years, Clara had heard stories of the demon that roamed the small, isolated village where her grandparents lived. The villagers spoke of a creature that wandered the streets at night, looking for someone to mark. Once the demon chose you, it was said, it would leave its handprint on your body, a mark that could never be removed. After that, it would follow you everywhere, tormenting you until it finally claimed your soul. Clara never believed in such things. She thought it was just a superstition to scare children into behaving. But one summer, while visiting her grandparents, she saw something that made her question everything. It was a moonless night, and the village was eerily silent. As she lay in bed, trying to sleep, Clara heard a faint scraping sound outside her window. Curious, she got up to look. What she saw froze her blood. A figure was moving down the street, its body twisted and hunched, like something from a nightmare. It moved with a strange, jerking gait, its long, bony arms hanging limply at its sides. But what terrified her most were its glowing red eyes, which seemed to pierce through the darkness and lock onto hers. Clara stepped back from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure stopped in front of her house, its head tilting up to look directly at her. Slowly, it raised one of its long, clawed hands and pressed it against her window. The glass frosted over instantly, and Clara could see the outline of the demon's handprint, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Panicked, she backed away, but the next morning, when she checked her arm, the handprint was there, burned into her skin like a brand. From that day on, Clara was never alone. She could feel the demon's presence everywhere, its eyes watching her, its breath on the back of her neck, its voice whispering in her ear. No matter where she went, it followed, always lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment it would claim her for good. 21. The demon in the forgotten asylum. Deep in the woods stood an abandoned asylum, its walls crumbling and its windows shattered. The locals spoke in whispers about the horrors that had taken place there decades ago, when the facility had been home to some of the most disturbed minds. When it shut down, it wasn't just because of neglect. Rumors spread that something dark, something far worse than any human mind could comprehend, had taken root in the building. Nathan and his friends were thrill seekers, always looking for new places to explore. The asylum seemed like the perfect challenge. Despite the stories of a demon roaming its halls, they ventured in one stormy night, armed with flashlights and cameras. The moment they stepped inside, the air felt different. It was heavy, thick with the weight of countless tragedies. The walls were stained, and the scent of mildew and decay filled the air. The floors creaked underfoot, but it wasn't the building's instability that unnerved them. It was the feeling that they were being watched. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, they began hearing noises, whispers, faint at first, then louder, as if coming from the very walls around them. Nathan brushed it off as wind, but his nerves were on edge. One by one, they began seeing shadowy figures darting through the corners of their vision, but whenever they turned their flashlights, there was nothing there. In the center of the asylum, they came across a room that had been sealed off, its door covered in strange symbols. Nathan pushed it open, curious about what was inside. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the middle, chains attached to the floor around it. A sense of dread washed over them all. Suddenly, the temperature dropped and the door slammed shut. The lights from their flashlights flickered, and an oppressive darkness swallowed the room. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, its skin ashen and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, but burning with a faint red light. The demon had been waiting. It moved with unnatural speed, its long arms reaching for them as it let out a bone-chilling screech. Nathan's friends tried to run, but the air around them seemed to thicken, slowing their movements. The walls trembled as the demon closed in, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. Nathan stood frozen, his heart racing. He could feel the demon's breath on the back of his neck, the weight of its gaze pressing down on him. With a final surge of adrenaline, he grabbed his friends and bolted for the door, throwing it open just in time. The asylum groaned as they ran, as if the building itself was alive, trying to trap them inside. They made it out, but Nathan knew they weren't safe. Even after they left the asylum, he could feel the demon's presence following them. The whispers continued, no matter where he went. The demon had marked them, and there was no escaping its grasp. 22. The demon of the graveyard shift. Liam had always been a night owl, so when he landed a job as a security guard for an old office building, the graveyard shift seemed perfect. The building was mostly empty at night, save for a few late workers, and the quiet hours gave him time to catch up on books and relax. But soon after he started, strange things began happening. The building itself was old, with creaky floors and dimly lit hallways. It didn't bother Liam at first. He was used to the sounds of an empty building settling. But one night, around 3 a.m., he started hearing something else. Footsteps echoed from the floors above him, even though he knew the offices were locked and everyone had gone home. Curious, he went to investigate. As he ascended the stairs, the footsteps stopped. He reached the top floor and shined his flashlight down the long corridor, but saw nothing. The air felt colder than usual, and the lights flickered briefly. Dismissing it as a power surge, Liam continued his rounds. The next night, it happened again, footsteps, louder this time, and a faint tapping on the windows. But there was no one outside, and no sign of intruders. Liam's unease grew, but he still tried to rationalize it. He hadn't yet heard the stories about the building's past, about the worker who had gone mad and vanished after claiming to see a demon stalking the halls during the night. On the third night, as he patrolled the building, the lights suddenly went out. Liam's flashlight flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. From the far end of the hallway, he heard it, a low growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping across the floor. Heart pounding, Liam turned to run, but his feet felt like they were sinking into the ground. A shadowy figure appeared at the end of the hall, its glowing red eyes cutting through the darkness. The demon moved toward him, its form shifting and morphing, as if made of smoke and ash. It wasn't bound by the physical world. Desperate, Liam ran into the nearest office and slammed the door shut, but the demon wasn't deterred. It seeped through the cracks, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. Liam's vision blurred, and the last thing he saw before blacking out was the demon's hand reaching for him, its long twisted fingers curling around his throat. When he woke, the lights were back on, and everything seemed normal, but he knew it wasn't. The demon had followed him home. Every night, as he lay in bed, he could hear the footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. The graveyard shift had marked him, and now the demon roamed not just the building, but his life. 23. The demon in the attic. Sarah had just moved into her new home, a charming old house with creaky floors and a drafty attic. The previous owners had left in a hurry, leaving behind a mess of old furniture and forgotten belongings. Excited to start fresh, Sarah decided to clean out the attic herself, thinking it would be a good project to tackle. The attic was dark and dusty, filled with cobwebs and boxes stacked high. As she sifted through the clutter, she found an old chest tucked away in the far corner, its lid locked tight. Intrigued, Sarah managed to pry it open. Inside were strange items, old bones, a cracked mirror, and a small book written in an ancient language she didn't recognize. That night, after putting everything away, Sarah started hearing noises. At first, it was just the sound of footsteps above her, but then came the whispers. Faint at first, almost like the wind, but growing louder each night. The air in the house became thick and oppressive, and no matter how many windows she opened, the rooms stayed cold. Then came the dreams. Every night, Sarah would dream of a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. Its face was always in shadow, but its eyes glowed red, watching her, waiting. She could never move in the dreams, paralyzed with fear as the demon stood closer and closer each time. One evening, Sarah woke to the sound of heavy breathing, only to realize it wasn't coming from her. Slowly, she turned to see a shadowy figure standing by the door, just as it had in her dreams. The air around her crackled with a sinister energy, and her body went numb. The demon had followed her out of the attic, and now it was roaming the house. Desperate, she called a priest to cleanse the home. But even after the rituals, the presence didn't leave. The priest warned her that the demon had likely been bound to the chest in the attic, an ancient relic used to contain its power. By opening it, she had set the demon free. Now, the demon wandered the halls of her home, always lurking just out of sight, waiting for her to let her guard down. Sarah could feel its cold breath on her neck when she walked upstairs, hear its whispers in her ear at night. The attic door never stayed closed, and no matter what she did, the demon refused to leave. 24. The demon of the desert road. Mike was no stranger to long, lonely drives. As a trucker, he had spent countless nights on desolate highways, but there was one stretch of desert road that always made him uneasy. It was a barren, forgotten part of Route 66, known for strange occurrences. Some truckers refused to take it after dark, claiming there was something out there, something not of this world. One hot summer night, Mike found himself alone on that very road, the sun long gone, leaving the desert in darkness. His truck's headlights cut through the inky black, illuminating nothing but empty road and desert brush. The radio had lost signal hours ago, and the silence was almost suffocating. Around 2 a.m., Mike saw something in the distance. At first, it looked like a hitchhiker standing on the side of the road, waving for help. But as he got closer, he realized something was off. The figure was too tall, its limbs too long, and its skin seemed to shimmer in the headlights like smoke. Mike's heart raced as the figure stepped into the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt just inches from the figure. But when he looked again, it was gone. Before Mike could react, a loud bang echoed from the back of the truck, followed by a low growl. He glanced in the side mirror and saw it, a dark shape clinging to the trailer, its glowing red eyes glaring back at him. Panicked, Mike floored the gas, trying to shake the creature off, but it held on, its claws digging into the metal. The truck swerved as the demon climbed closer, its form shifting and flickering in the darkness like a living shadow. Mike could hear its growl, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through his chest. Desperate, he turned off the road and sped through the desert, the demon still clinging to the truck. But no matter how fast he drove, the creature wouldn't let go. It was a roaming demon, drawn to the road by the fear and isolation of those who traveled it. Hours later, as dawn began to break, the demon finally disappeared. Mike pulled over, shaking, his heart still racing. The back of his truck was covered in deep claw marks, proof that what he had encountered wasn't just a hallucination. Now, whenever he drives that stretch of road, Mike refuses to travel at night. He knows the demon is still out there, wandering the desert, waiting for the next traveler to cross its path. 25. The demon in the mirror maze. At the edge of a small town sat an old carnival, long abandoned and forgotten. The rusting rides and tattered tents stood as a reminder of its heyday, but few dared to go near it. The locals spoke of a demon that roamed the carnival grounds, particularly in the mirror maze, a place where visitors had once gotten lost, some never returning. Anna and her friends, bored and looking for adventure, decided to explore the carnival one evening. The sun was setting, casting eerie shadows over the dilapidated attractions. They wandered through the empty stalls and crumbling rides until they reached the mirror maze. The entrance was still intact, though covered in dirt and graffiti. Ignoring their growing unease, the group entered the maze, laughing nervously as they navigated the twisting hallways. The mirrors, though cracked and dirty, still reflected their images, but something about the reflections seemed off. As they ventured deeper into the maze, the air grew colder and their reflections became distorted. Faces stretched unnaturally long, smiles turned into twisted grins. Then, one by one, their reflections stopped moving, standing still even as they walked. Anna's heart pounded as she stared at her reflection, which now looked nothing like her. The figure in the mirror was taller, with hollow eyes and a mouth that twisted into a sinister grin. Slowly, the reflection raised its hand and pointed directly at her. Suddenly, the maze seemed to close in on them. The mirrors shifted, trapping them in a never-ending loop. No matter which direction they turned, the exit eluded them. The reflections began to move again, but now they were different, no longer mirroring their movements, but watching them, mocking them. Then, from the corner of her eye, Anna saw it. A figure moved through the mirrors, but it wasn't her or her friends. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, its face hidden except for a pair of glowing red eyes. The demon. Panic set in as the demon moved closer, its form shifting from mirror to mirror. The reflections grinned wider, their eyes following its movements. Anna and her friends tried to run, but the maze twisted, trapping them further. The demon was everywhere now, its laughter echoing through the holes the reflections reached out, hands pressing against the glass as if trying to escape. Anna could feel the demon's presence growing stronger, feeding off their fear. Finally, she and her friends stumbled out of the maze, gasping for breath, but they knew they hadn't truly escaped. 26. The Demon of the Lighthouse. The old lighthouse on Grimsby Cliff had been abandoned for over a century. It was said to be cursed, its light extinguished after the last keeper mysteriously vanished without a trace. The story told by the locals was chilling. A demon roamed the cliffs, drawn to the lighthouse, where it claimed the souls of those foolish enough to stay the night. Arthur, a thrill-seeker and amateur paranormal investigator, decided to spend a weekend there, determined to prove the legends wrong. Armed with his camera and a few survival essentials, he hiked up the steep path to the weather-beaten lighthouse. As he reached the top, the wind picked up, howling through the rocks like a warning. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the churning sea below. The interior of the lighthouse was dark and cold, with the walls covered in seaweed and mold. Arthur set up his equipment, convinced that any strange occurrences would be nothing more than the wind or old, creaking wood. As night fell, the temperature dropped even further, and a deep, unsettling silence filled the air. Around midnight, Arthur heard the first knock. It was faint, but distinct, echoing up from the lower levels. Thinking it might be the wind, he ignored it, but then it came again, louder this time, deliberate, like someone was knocking on the heavy iron door at the base of the tower. Curious, Arthur grabbed his flashlight and descended the narrow spiral staircase. The air grew colder as he neared the bottom, and the knocking grew more insistent. He hesitated for a moment before opening the door. No one was there. He turned to head back upstairs when he felt it, a presence behind him, cold and malevolent. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as a low growl rumbled through the darkness. Arthur's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. The knocking started again, this time from inside the lighthouse. As he ran back up the stairs, the growling followed, echoing through the narrow staircase. His heart pounded as the tower shook, and a loud crash rang out from above. Reaching the top, Arthur froze. The lighthouse's lantern, which hadn't worked in decades, was now ablaze with a ghostly light, spinning faster and faster. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, with long, bony arms and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. The demon had come for him. Arthur backed away, but the creature moved with impossible speed, its claws scraping against the walls as it approached. The lighthouse trembled as if alive, the air thick with the smell of salt and decay. The demon let out a bone-chilling scream, its voice echoing over the cliffs and into the sea. Desperate, Arthur fled the lighthouse, running down the cliffside as the demon's voice followed him, whispering promises of torment and death. He didn't stop running until he reached the town below, shaken and pale, barely able to speak. The lighthouse still stands, its ghostly light sometimes seen from the shore, spinning in the dead of night. The locals say that those who see it are marked by the demon, destined to meet the same fate as the lighthouse keeper and Arthur, haunted, hunted, and ultimately claimed by the creature that roams the cliffs. 27. The demon in the storm drain. There was a storm drain in the heart of the city that people avoided. Tucked away in an alley, it was covered with rust and grime, and the metal bars were twisted into unnatural shapes. The locals spoke of a demon that lived beneath the streets, wandering the tunnels, waiting for unsuspecting souls to get too close. Marcus was a street artist who had heard the stories but didn't believe them. To him, it was just another urban legend, a way for kids to scare each other. One evening, after finishing a mural nearby, he decided to take a closer look at the infamous drain. The storm was approaching, and the wind had picked up, but he didn't care. As he approached the drain, the smell hit him first, a foul stench like rotting flesh mixed with something metallic. The air around the drain felt thick, as if something was pushing against it from below. He crouched down and peered through the bars, shining his phone's flashlight into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but murky water and debris. Then something moved. A shadow, deep in the tunnel, shifting slowly as if it had noticed him. Marcus stared, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the shadow grew larger, its shape becoming more defined. Two glowing red eyes appeared, reflecting the dim light of his phone. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the drain, vibrating the ground beneath him. Marcus stood up quickly, his heart racing. He took a step back, but as he did, the bars of the storm drain bent outward, as though something was forcing them apart from the inside. The growling grew louder, and a dark, clawed hand reached through the gap, dragging itself into the open air. The creature that emerged was not human. Its skin was slick and black, like oil, and its limbs were long and twisted. It moved with unnatural speed, crawling up from the depths of the drain, its eyes locked on Marcus. Panic surged through him as he stumbled backward, but the demon was already on the move. It let out a screech that echoed through the alley, sending chills down Marcus's spine. The storm raged overhead, rain pouring down as the demon crawled closer, its claws scraping against the concrete. Marcus turned and ran, his feet splashing through puddles as he fled down the alley. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of a nearby building. Even then, he could still hear the demon's growls, the storm seemingly intensifying in its wake. From that night on, Marcus avoided the storm drain, but he could never forget what he saw. He warned others to stay away, but the demon beneath the city's streets still roams, drawn to the storm and the darkness, always hungry for its next victim.